at the winter White House, resting up after a frenetic first year in office and preparing for what promises to be an even tougher 2018. Republicans will return to Washington with just a 51-49 majority in the Senate after that big upset in Alabama. And Democrats are expecting big gains in next year's midterm elections. We begin our look today at what's next with Mark Short, the White House Director of Legislative Affairs. And Mark, welcome back on this Christmas Eve to Fox News Sunday.
Chris, thanks for having me. Merry Christmas.
Before we get to all of that, we've got some breaking news we have to deal with. First of all, President Trump is on a tear this weekend, sending out repeated tweets attacking the deputy director of the FBI. There was one tweet this morning. FBI's Andrew McCabe, in addition to his wife getting all of this money from M, Clinton Puppet, for those scoring at home, that's Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe, who gave campaign contributions to Mrs. McCabe, who was running for office. He, McCabe, was using allegedly his FBI official email account to promote her campaign. You obviously cannot do this. These were the people who were investigating Hillary Clinton. Question. Is that helpful for the president to repeatedly attack top officials of the FBI?
Chris, I think the president believes that the American people have a right to know as to what happened with that investigation. As you mentioned in that tweet, and I think people need to remember this, Terry McAuliffe, the governor of Virginia, is perhaps the Clintons' closest political friend. He gave $700,000 contribution to McCabe's wife when she was running for office, at the same time that they were launching an investigation into Hillary Clinton. The American people have a right to know that. McCabe has announced that he looks to move forward and move on, and we wish him well.
He's talking about retiring when he gets a full pension in March.
Yes, sir. But I think it's also important to segregate that and separate it from the special counsel, because the White House has cooperated in every single way with that investigation. And after millions and millions of dollars, no collusion has been proven. So the president is saying we need to know that our civil servants are doing the honorable thing, and it's important that the American people know what happened in that investigation.
I want to be clear, though, because he has attacked in various tweets not just McCabe, but also James Baker, the general counsel of the FBI, Peter Strzok, the lead investigator, Lisa Page. Is he saying that there are some bad apples at the FBI, or is he saying that there's a fundamental structural problem with political bias?
I think he's very pleased to have Chris Wray now running the FBI. He's very pleased with the changes that are taking place. But at the same time, when we put all of our faith and confidence in the Department of Justice and the FBI, knowing that there should be no bias there, he's making the point that we need to make sure there's no bias. And I think there's serious concerns about whether or not there was or was not during the Hillary Clinton.
So is he telling the FBI director, Chris Wray, is his appointee? Is he telling him to clean house there?
I think that he has full confidence in Chris Wray, Chris.
Okay. That's just one breaking news story. There's also a story on today's front page of the New York Times that reports that in an Oval Office meeting last summer about immigrants flooding into the U.S., President Trump said about people from Haiti, quote, they all have AIDS, and immigrants from Nigeria would never, quote, go back to their huts. What's your response to that, and also to a federal judge in Seattle this weekend partially lifting again the president's travel ban?
So a couple different issues there. I was not in that meeting, but the people in the meeting say that those comments never happened. And so I have no belief that that actually transpired. But let's talk about the temporary protective status for a second, because it's an important case. The people here from Haiti are here from an earthquake that happened roughly 10 years ago under temporary protective status. We have tens of thousands of people still in our country from Honduras and from Nicaragua from a hurricane that happened in 1999. Tens of thousands of people under temporary protective status. The president has again and again made the case that on our immigration laws, Congress needs to change these laws as opposed to continual 6-month extensions of people that are here from 10 and 20 years ago, Chris.
All right, let's get to your day job. Even though you had a big success this past week, there's no rest for the weary. What's your legislative agenda for 2018, and what comes first?
Well, in 2017, Chris, first, let's look at all the firsts the president accomplished. The first president to get a Supreme Court justice confirmed in the first 100 days. The first president to get 12 circuit court judges confirmed in his first year. The first one to deliver on significant tax reform since 1986. The first one to roll back regulations with 15 times signing legislation under the Congressional Review Act. Only once before in our history had a president used Congressional Review Act to roll back. So it's been an exciting 2017, but we have a lot to do in 2018. I think you'll see the president roll out infrastructure plan in January, and the president has already invited Leader McConnell and Speaker Ryan to Camp David the first weekend in January to make sure we're all on the same page about what our priorities are for 2018.
Let's talk about infrastructure, because he signed the tax bill Friday. The president indicated he might begin with infrastructure. Here he is.
I really do believe we're going to have a lot of bipartisan work done, and maybe we start with infrastructure, because I really believe infrastructure can be bipartisan.
But while both parties want a $1 trillion program over the next decade, there's a big difference. The White House talks about $200 billion in federal money, with the rest coming from state and local governments and private investment. Democrats want the whole $100 trillion in federal funds, but say that you've already given that money away to corporations for your tax bill. So, given those huge differences, where's the basis for compromise?
There's no doubt, Chris, there's a pathway forward on this. Both Democrats and Republicans say their infrastructure is crumbling and we need to fix it. But the big question remains, will Democrats put politics aside and actually work with us? They need to meet us halfway. So far, when you talk about confirmations and our appointees to serve in administration, since George H.W. Bush, there were 32 filibusters on nominees. We've had 64 in our first year. Twice as many of 20 years combined. We've had twice as many in 1 year. Democrats have looked to obstruct this administration at every chance they can get. The question for them is, will they actually partner with us to try to do things for the American people?
All right, on infrastructure, they want all federal money. You want only $200 billion, with the rest coming from state, local, and private. They say the private would be a corporate giveaway. So where's the deal?
I think that I'm not going to get in front of the president. His plan is going to roll out in January, Chris, but I'm very confident. We've had conversations with Democrats. I think there's a willingness on the policy to get there. The question remains, will politics prevent it?
Okay, let's talk about another area with a lot of politics, because I think it's fair to say that there's a deal to be made on immigration. The Democrats want the dreamers, the young people who came into this country as children, as illegal immigrants, to get some permanent legal status. In return, what are you asking for in terms of border enforcement, and does there have to be at least some funding for the president's border wall?
Chris, the president put forward to Congress when he said that the deferred action for childhood arrivals was not constitutional. He put forward to Congress the principles he wanted, which included border security, it included interior enforcement, and included a couple of additions to ending chain migration. Those were the things that we asked for. We put that forward to Congress months ago. We're waiting for Congress to provide to us a proposal to get it done. But you're right. The president very much wants a deal here. He wants to solve this problem.
One of the things you did not mention just now is the border wall.
Well, I did. In border security, we very much consider a physical barrier part of the border security.
Is that non-negotiable, funding for the border wall?
Absolutely something the president has promised, and it's not that it's non-negotiable. It's what America needs. It's in our national security interest to prevent drug cartels, to prevent MS-13, and to secure our border.
Okay. Then you've got a lot of busy stuff in 2017. There's health care reform. Here's what the president said about the repeal of the individual mandate that was part of the tax bill this week.
Obamacare has been repealed in this bill. We didn't want to bring it up. I told people specifically, be quiet with the fake news media, because I don't want them talking too much about it.
But in fact, much of Obamacare remains subsidies to help buy coverage, Medicaid expansion that gives coverage to more than 10 million Americans, protection for pre-existing conditions. Fact is, this week we learned that almost 9 million people enrolled in the federal Obamacare exchange. So isn't the president just flat wrong when he says that Obamacare has been repealed?
No, I think the president is right in saying that the heart of Obamacare has been repealed, and that was the individual mandate. It's what most Americans found most offensive, for the government to dictate to you, to say, we're going to require you to buy something whether you want it or not. There's a certain element of freedom that we still believe and cherish in this country, and that was at the root of Obamacare.
But we're still going to have millions, more than 10 million people who are going to get their health care coverage through Obamacare, through expanded Medicaid. They're still going to get paid by the subsidies, still going to get the protections of pre-existing conditions. Obamacare is still here, sir.
Obamacare continues to collapse. The estimates were there would be 20 million more today than there are. And so, yes, there are 9 million that have signed up, but it's way short of the estimates. It continues to fall apart. It continues to collapse. What the administration is looking to do is to shore up the markets through administrative actions that we can take, such as you saw the president sign an executive order allowing associated health plans so that more people can pool their resources together to help lower premiums. We will continue to see us take administrative action on Obamacare.
Finally, I want to ask you about a couple of foreign affairs issues. President Trump issued a threat this week to countries at the UN not to oppose his decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Here he is.
They take hundreds of millions of dollars and even billions of dollars, and then they vote against us. Well, we're watching those votes. Let them vote against us. We'll save a lot. We don't care.
In the end, 128 countries ignored the president's threat and voted against his new policy. But the fact is that the only countries besides Israel that get as much as $1 billion in foreign aid that he's talking about perhaps doing away with are two allies, Egypt and Jordan. So is he really mean what he says about cutting aid either to countries like Egypt and Jordan or to the UN itself?
There were a couple of very important things that happened in the United Nations this week, and you're covering one of them, and that is recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Keep in mind that in 1995, Congress voted overwhelmingly that that's what the American position will be, and voted again 90-0 with 10 abstentions last year. It is a policy that is represented by many Americans. The president followed through on a campaign promise. Also last week, there was a vote 15-0 to help put additional sanctions on North Korea. That is something that's been underreported. The president's leadership with Ambassador Haley in bringing the United Nations together in isolating North Korea. That is far more important to what our national security objectives are.
But respectfully, to answer my question, will the president go ahead and ask Congress to cut funding either to countries that voted against the new U.S. policy in Jerusalem or to cut funding to the UN itself?
I'm not going to get ahead of the president, but I think the countries that continue to thwart the will of us and refuse to partner with us, they should be cognizant of the president delivering on his promises he's made before.
Finally, Special Counsel Robert Mueller is continuing his investigation into possible collusion with the Russians, into possible obstruction of justice. White House lawyers have been saying for weeks that they expect the special counsel to exonerate the president by early in 2018. Did the White House lawyers meet, as had been reported they were scheduled to, with the special counsel's office this week? And on what basis do they believe that this investigation, at least as it involves the president, is going to be wrapped up early next year?
Well, Chris, thankfully that is handled separately, and I'm not in the middle of those conversations. But I think the reality is that we said before that the American taxpayer spent millions and millions of dollars on investigations so far that has proven no evidence whatsoever of collusion with Russia. We're anxious to see this resolved, and allow the country to move forward.
Do you believe, as they say, that this investigation, in terms of the special counsel exonerating the president, is going to be cleared up early in 2018?
There's no way for me to know what the timing of that is, Chris. We continue to cooperate fully, and everything that they've asked for, we're anxious for it to be resolved, though.
I got to say, Mark, I had a lot of things to ask you, and we got them all in. Thank you. Thank you especially for coming in on Christmas Eve. Merry Christmas to you and your family.
Merry Christmas, sir.
Up next, what are the chances for bipartisan compromise in Congress in the new year? Democratic Senator Ben Cardin weighs in on that, and what grade he gives Donald Trump's year one when Fox News Sunday comes right back.
On Fox.
For all the focus on domestic policy, President Trump also had an ambitious foreign policy agenda this year. Joining me now, the top Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Ben Cardin. Happy holidays and welcome back to Fox News Sunday, Senator.
Thanks, Chris. Happy holidays to you.
You just heard Mark Short, the White House legislative director. Do you see any areas of compromise between Republicans and Democrats in the new Congress, or is it going to be all politics all the time?
I think we'll know very early. January 19th is the deadline for getting the budget done. We're already 3 months into this fiscal year, and we don't have a budget. the way the budget is handled, I think, will be an indicator of whether we can have bipartisan cooperation. It's not just the budget for the year. We have disaster relief for the people of Texas and Florida, California, and Puerto Rico. We have the immigration issues that need to be dealt with now. And I think the manner in which that is handled can set the stage for Congress, Democrats and Republicans working together. Or if they can't, if the president won't work with us on that, it's going to be a tough year.
Well, let me ask you about a couple of specifics, a few specifics that I just raised with Mark Short. There's infrastructure, there's immigration, there's welfare reform. In those specific areas, do you see the outlines of a compromise with the president?
Well, there's been negotiations between Democrats and Republicans on immigration. We're hoping that we can get the Dreamer bill done. We also have people, with, as is pointed out, on temporary protective status. We have to deal with that issue. Mark's right. We should pass legislation in these areas. The president's made it more difficult, but we need to get together, and we have Democrats and Republicans working together. On infrastructure, absolutely we want to get an infrastructure bill done. It's more challenging because of the tax bill and the revenues that have been taken off the table, but we could work together and get something done on that.
In terms of immigration, as I was talking about, there is an obvious deal to be made there. On the one hand, you and some Republicans want to give protection to the Dreamers. On the other hand, Republicans, and especially this president, want tougher border enforcement, including funding for the wall. Would you be willing to compromise there?
We need to get the Dreamer issue done. It should not be connected to anything else. In regards to border security,
wait a minute, Senator,
yes,
that's not a compromise, because you have something you want in immigration, they have something they want. Why not put them together?
Well, of course, the president put the deadline when he gave 6 months earlier this year. So we have a deadline on the Dreamers. We should do better border security. We're for border security, but let's make it sensible border security. Let's deal with the technologies on the border. Let's deal with the real problems there. The wall is not going to make us safer.
All right, let's turn to your particular area of expertise, which is foreign policy. You heard my discussion just now with Mark Short about the Trump administration issuing a threat to the UN and to its member nations about not voting against his decision to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Here at the UN was our ambassador, Nikki Haley.
No vote in the United Nations will make any difference on that. But this vote will make a difference on how Americans look at the UN and on how we look at countries who disrespect us in the UN. And this vote will be remembered.
Senator, what do you make of the president issuing that threat, and what happens in Congress if the president tries to make good on the threat and to cut funding either to some of the countries that opposed us or to the UN itself?
Well, first, as has been pointed out, the United States recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, the Congress did that in 1995. The country has the right to determine its own capital. I don't think it was a controversial move, but the manner in which he handled it, without using diplomacy, without trying to advance the peace process, using this to put other issues on the table so we could get the Palestinians and Israelis talking together, that, I think, was the mistake. So the reaction in the United Nations, I think, was expected. I don't know whether it's useful to make threats. We do watch how the countries in the United Nations vote on our resolutions. We always do that. But I think the manner in which the president handled this is not in our best national security interest.
All right, let's turn to another subject. The U.S. pushed a resolution through the UN Security Council on Friday imposing new sanctions against North Korea, including sharp new limits on petroleum shipments to North Korea. And the vote got the support of both China and Russia. It was 15-0 in the Security Council. Doesn't that indicate that the Trump administration diplomacy to try to build up international support against North Korea is working?
That was a good move. That was a major accomplishment. I give our team a lot of credit for getting that done. There are pretty strong additional sanctions to be imposed against North Korea because of their continued testing of ballistic missiles. So that is absolutely, it was a strong move forward. It was great to see China and Russia join us in that. It now needs to be followed up with diplomacy, where we get China and the United States working with the same strategy with North Korea to find a way that we can ease the tension and get North Korea to change directions. So it was a good first step.
Another trouble spot, Ukraine. The president has agreed to sell lethal weapons to Ukraine, including anti-tank missiles, to fight the pro-Russian separatist forces there. This is a move that President Obama has consistently for years refused to make. Will you support that, or will you try to block the sale in Congress?
I talked to Secretary Tillerson earlier this week. I support the administration's decision to provide these types of defensive weapons for the Ukrainians. It's a clear message to Russia that we will not allow them to continue to compromise the sovereignty of Ukraine. Russia will continue to push as far as they can. It was important for the United States to tell Russia that we will support Ukraine's ability to defend itself. So I support the decision.
Overall, how do you think the administration has done this first year in foreign policy? And are you troubled that we have a Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, who almost everybody in Washington thinks is going to be gone within a year? Has he lost his credibility as he travels the world representing this country?
In many respects, our foreign policy is inconsistent. We'll have a policy coming out of the State Department or coming out from people that are representing the White House, and then have the president come out with a tweet that totally undermines that. We saw that in North Korea when Secretary Tillerson was pursuing diplomacy, and then the president undercut his ability with a tweet. So I think we found from the president he doesn't always support his team, and therefore we have an inconsistent message. We have distant America. When we say America first, it looks like America in isolation, and America's lost its leadership in many key issues. That's certainly true on climate change, where we were not as present and bond as we should have on climate talks. China came in and took a lot of the leadership that should have been with the United States. So we see the United States being excluded from a lot of the discussions globally, and that's not helpful to our national security.
Senator, I want to put up some numbers for you that I think are fairly striking. We now have growth of 3%, unemployment just over 4%. The Dow Jones average is up almost 25% since the Trump inauguration. ISIS has lost 97% of the land it once controlled in Iraq and Syria. For all the controversies, for all the questions about this administration, when you look back on all of that, hasn't President Trump had a pretty good year?
I think it reflects the fact that America is the strongest nation in the world, that what we can do, this country really is indispensable to the global community, and that there were seeds planted by both Democratic and Republican administrations that have caused us to continue to grow. But as we do that, there's a lot of Americans who have been left behind. And I think that's the key challenge. We have a shrinking middle class. We've got to focus on a growing middle class. And I think there was a missed opportunity on this tax bill where it helped basically large corporations and high-income people. If we could have focused on middle income, we could have, I think, helped grow the middle class, which would have been good for our future. Things are good. They can be better, and let's concentrate on middle-income families.
Okay, I got less than a minute left. I want to ask you about one last area. Congress has been investigating the whole Russia issue for about a year. The Justice Department has been investigating possible ties between the Trump campaign and Russia for a year and a half. Really, two questions. First of all, do you feel any urgency to wrap this up, to remove the cloud over our president if it can be removed? And secondly, what do you think of the tweets, and it's continued this week, on the attacks against the FBI?
I think it's critically important that we respect the independence of the Department of Justice and the FBI. No one's above the law. Let Mr. Mueller do his investigation without interference from the president. In regards to this investigation, I hope it is completed early. I think the American people need to understand exactly what Russia was doing here in the United States and the involvement with the Trump campaign. It would be helpful for this country to have as much that information made available as quickly as possible.
Senator Cardin, thank you. Thanks for your time, and happy holidays to you and your family, sir.
Thanks, Chris. Same to you.
Up next, we'll bring in our Sunday group to look back at 2017. Plus, what would you like to ask the panel about the president's first year in office? Just go to Facebook or Twitter at Fox News Sunday, and we may use your question on the air.
Look from Fox 43.
help the rich, hurt the middle class. The whole year can be summed up in that one sentence.
But unfortunately, the Democrats don't like to see tax cutting. They like to see tax increases. And they like to complain. But they don't get it done, unfortunately. But they complain a lot.
President Trump and Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer wrapping up 2017 with two very different takes on Congress passing the Republican tax bill. And it's time now for our Sunday group. Former National Security Council staffer and now a Fox News correspondent, Jillian Turner, columnist for The Hill, Juan Williams, Bob Woodward from The Washington Post, and Fox News politics editor Chris Steyerwalt. Merry Christmas Eve to all of you, and thank you for coming in. Jillian, there were certainly times this year when it appeared that the Trump presidency was headed off the tracks. But when you look back at the numbers that the economic numbers I just showed Senator Cardin, the success with ISIS, now the passage of the signature tax cut bill, has 2017 turned out to be a pretty good year for President Trump?
It's definitely ending on a high note, is the way that I would describe it. Specifically with the stock market booming, on the foreign policy side of things, ISIS has been really the sweet spot for the administration this year. The United States military has decimated their strongholds in Iraq and Syria, essentially denying them any claims to a legitimate caliphate. The challenge on this and many other issues is that the world, at the risk of sounding trite, the world is a complex place today, and the nature of all the threats we face as a nation are changing. They're evolving very quickly. So if we take ISIS as an example, we have had great success militarily. The new front in the war on terror next year and beyond is really going to be in cyberspace. So the question is, how quickly can the administration adapt? How can they take these policy successes and translate them in the future?
We ask you for questions for the panel, and we got this on Facebook from Christopher Fauver, who writes, is Trump going to be another Reagan? Thought to be a lightweight, but gets conservative agenda put in action. Juan, how do you answer, Christopher?
Well, I think if you look at the past year, picking up on what Jillian was saying, you'd have to say that in terms of putting conservative judges on the courts, in terms of things like the dismantling of regulations, the regulatory state, Trump has had some success. Or I would say, actually, Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell have had success while using Trump almost as a distraction. To me, when you think about Ronald Reagan, it was the ability to negotiate at times across the aisle. I don't think Trump has that. I'm not sure I can point to one Republican who would say he voted for the tax bill because of Trump. I think the deals were struck by, for example, in the Senate, McConnell, Anwar drilling for Lisa Murkowski, you know, something of a promise on health care going to Susan Collins of Maine, something promised about immigration reform to Jeff Flake. That's the so-called swamp that Trump once promised to drain. Actually, McConnell, I think, has poured some water and muck into that swamp.
One of the president's complaints is that he doesn't get a fair shake from the mainstream media. Mr. Williams, a perfect example of that. Here was the president on Friday as he signed the tax bill.
Legislative approvals, for which I'm given no credit in the mainstream media. We have, I believe it's 88, which is #1 in the history of our country.
Chris, is this presidency the hot mess it's often portrayed as being, or does President Trump have a point?
Well, I think he very much has a point. I think he has a point that much of the coverage about him has been withering and unfairly so. But then again, much of the coverage has also been fairly harsh because, as we've already alluded to, the opening stanzas of this presidency, the first 8 months, 10 months, were very, very off-kilter. And he had a hard run getting started. So much of the coverage that was harsh was unfair. And he also benefits, by the way, from a lot of very favorable coverage and talking points from his boosters out there. So I don't think we can just say that he is a victim.
Bob, I want to continue on this theme. You're writing a book about Donald Trump that's going to come out next year.
At an undetermined date.
You're having problems making the deadline with your editor?
There's so much, and getting your arms around it is difficult. It's hard.
Trying to rush the process.
Well, wait. What are you finding? Is part of the story how much he has changed as president, or how little he's changed as president?
Well, I can't really answer that. And what's interesting interesting. There's a discussion going on about whether there is within the Trump presidency a crisis of legitimacy. And I think as you look back on it, there is not, actually. He was elected. Ben Cardin, Democrat, was saying, gee, I agree with this, I agree with that. Much disagreement on the tax cut, but we're going to see. As we know, in tax cuts, it depends on outcomes. The condition of the economy is good now, supposedly. We will see. So that can't be measured. So at the same time, there's been a lot of turmoil in the Trump presidency. One of the people I talked to called it a chaos furnace. And there's a lot of truth in that, and that's Trump's style. And a lot of that is done intentionally with his tweets in the morning, which you talk to anyone on the staff, and there is no clearinghouse for his tweets. He's going to do it all on his own. And that's defined a lot.
Do you agree with, I'm surprised is a consensus, it seems to be on this panel, that the president has ended the year much stronger than he started?
Well, the tax cut's important, and look at foreign affairs. There's been lots of anxiety, rightfully so, that maybe there's going to be a war with North Korea. I think that's been turned down. ISIS is a plus, maybe, but we'll have to see. I mean, you're exactly right. It is a dangerous world, but the fuse of instability is lit in so many countries, and the crisis can come from a place we least expected. I'm looking at this, and there are dozens of places that can go off and wind up defining the presidency. And so, that's why I'm waiting to finish the book.
Gillian, how does this president compare both in substance and style points to the two presidents that you work for in the National Security Council, Bush 43 and Obama?
I think it's fair to say that President Trump is different in every way imaginable, both and they were very different from one another, President Obama and President Bush. President Trump is temperamentally different. I think his worldview is different from any president we've potentially seen before. And I think what he is, the end of the year always offers this opportunity to sort of talk about lessons learned. And I think one of the things the administration has done well is that they've learned to adapt some fairly outlandish policy ideas to suit the swamp and to suit the Congress. And they've become, there's no better example than the travel ban, the president's beloved travel ban. If you look at the first version, it was fairly outrageous. Everything from what it said on paper to how it was rolled out. We go from there to the second, and then the third version has sort of passed without much controversy. Mm-hmm. And what they're doing there is trying to, I think, they're coming to terms with the fact that the president doesn't have all the prerogative in the world, and if he wants to get these fairly controversial things through, he's going to have to learn to adapt. He's adapting to the swamp.
Can I just throw in there, when you were saying that there's a consensus on the panel, I think my part to contribution to this consensus would be that the right-wing agenda in America has been advanced by a Republican Congress, McConnell and Ryan. But if you look at the tax bill, remember Trump promised to increase taxes on the rich, get rid of carried interest for the hedge fund people. The exact opposite has come through because of the agenda, McConnell, Ryan, in terms of cutting taxes on the upper income, and in terms of beginning a tax on the social safety net that I anticipate to come on Medicare, Social Security, and the like, because they'll say the revenue's not there.
I think you can rest easy, Mr. Williams. I do not think that is in the offing at any time soon.
You don't think that Paul Ryan has promised that?
Well, I'm sure they promised.
Folks, you have another panel, and I don't want you to steal time from yourselves on the other side of the break. So we're going to take a break here. When we come back, we'll look ahead to President Trump's prospects for a year or two, his policy agenda, the political challenges, and yes, the continuing Russia investigation.
It's always a lot of fun when you win. If you work hard and lose, that's not acceptable.
President Trump celebrating with congressional Republicans the passage of his first major legislative win, that big tax cut, and promising more victories in 2018. And we're back now with the panel. Well, Chris, you heard the president's legislative director, Mark Short, laying out a pretty ambitious agenda for 2018. How much of that will actually get done, given the fact that they don't have reconciliation, they got to pass it with 9 Democratic votes in the Senate, and that you've got the midterms coming up in November?
Well, look, even before they begin negotiating with Democrats, and it is, of course, the kind of pivot that we had anticipated from the president, really from the beginning, reach out to Democrats, infrastructure, find ways to build this new populist, almost centrist in some ways, on domestic policy agenda. But they have a big rhubarb to settle among Republicans before they figure out what they're going to do there, because they made a lot of promises to ideologically disparate Republicans in order to get the tax bill passed. That bill is coming due really in January through March, as they have to deal with DACA, illegal immigrants who were brought to the United States as minors. They have to deal with the questions of fixing Obamacare or patching Obamacare for the year. Different promises to different people. And then on top of that, you want to talk about changing entitlement reform. Rand Paul closes the year in the Senate saying, we're coming back, we're cutting spending, we're coming back, we're cutting welfare. And tell me how you make that all fit.
One thing that struck me about the president's event on the South Lawn this week after he had signed the tax cut bill was how much, and this picks up on what Jillian said, he's adapted to Washington. He was calling out not just the leaders, because it seemed when he came, he knew about 4 names of people in Congress. He was calling out committee chairmen. He was calling out subcommittee chairmen. Has he gotten better? And in fact, has he begun to master the art of the legislative deal?
Well, I think what you said is true. And by the way, what a show of sycophancy. I mean, it's unbelievable, that exhibit at the White House. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I thought it was kind of like some authoritarian leader from some other country in front of his, self-selected leaders. Oh, dear leader, we love you, Mr. Trump. Good God. Anyway, I think that what you have seen is that he has more familiarity with Congress and understands that he has to make deals through Congress.
But of course he's got to make deals through Congress. I mean, Ronald Reagan had to make deals through Congress. Bill Clinton did.
Yes.
My point is...
But I'm not sure he recognized that when he started.
I understand, but would you agree that he now does understand that?
No, even in the tax bill, it's not that he put forward, with Mark Short's help, some legislative agenda or structure that allowed them to act. It was that they came up with their own prescriptions to their conservative agenda.
You're not going to give him any credit.
No, I think he knows now, some members of Congress, and understands he's got to work with Congress. But for example, Mark Short said to you, we want to do something on infrastructure. And what you hear from the Democrats in the Senate, as we heard this morning, is, yeah, we want to do something on infrastructure, but where's the revenue? You just passed a tax bill that took away the money.
No, that's true. That was $1 trillion that they wanted to get, that they were going to put into infrastructure. Now it's only another $1 trillion they got to find. It's over 10 years. Anyway, casting a shadow over everything is a continuing investigation of Russia. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer put the president on notice this week.
If the president were to fire Special Counsel Mueller, our country would face a constitutional crisis.
Bob, as a veteran of covering Watergate, of covering Iran-Contra, of covering the Monica Lewinsky, where are we headed in 2018? You hear White House lawyers saying that this is going to be wrapped up quickly, that the president, at least as far as the president's concerned, maybe not Paul Manafort, that he's going to be exonerated early in 2018, and you hear some Democrats say they're just getting started.
My analysis and information is that we reporters and the public only know a sliver of what's going on in that investigation, and we also only know a sliver of what really happened. Mueller is the special counsel here, has extraordinary power in law. Supreme Court decision in the Nixon case saying you as the investigator have the power to get the evidence. In the case of Nixon, it was the tape. So Mueller presumably can get all evidence and testimony on this. So we don't know where it's going to go. I think one of the big problems here is our business, the media. You see the declarations about, oh, we know this is going to lead to impeachment, or the declarations that it's going to be over, it's going to go away. I suspect if we had Mueller here on sodium pentothal, the truth serum.
I would love that. Let me tell you.
Well, try.
Wow. I think when I come at him with a hypodermic, it's going to be a problem.
Sometimes you have to roll the dice. Donald Trump knows that. And I think he likely would say, I don't know. This is a process. He's very exhaustive. And that's exactly the way it should be.
But let me ask you, because Congress has been investigating this question for a year. The Justice Department has been investigating this question of possible collusion for a year and a half, since the summer of 2016. Why don't we have any sense at all, if there is any, of any collusion between the Russians and the Trump campaign?
A fair question. And, you know, maybe we won't. Maybe the trail will become cold. We don't know. But these things take time. Mueller started in May. That's the really serious investigation. But I think in the discussion about it, and what is somebody who's done this for, 47 years, there is in the media this polarization and people attacking Trump, and the kind of self-satisfaction and smugness and ridicule, which I think does not work at all. And on the other side, oh, Trump is totally right, this is innocent, this is some sort of jihad against him. And I think we need to turn that down and listen to facts. There are facts out there, and be a little restrained.
I couldn't agree more, but good luck to you in trying to get that done. Jillian, I want to get you into this. On the foreign policy front, North Korea, Russia, China, Middle East, what are you looking for in 2018?
So I think, just quickly on North Korea, the big variable is whether or not we end up at war with the North Korean regime. I'm not refuting Bob, I wouldn't dare do that, but I don't think the question of whether or not we're going to war with the North is at all settled at this time. I hope you're right and I'm wrong. On Russia, the investigation aside, I think the U.S.-Russia bilateral relationship is taking a nosedive. That is evidenced by the fact that the announcement this week that we're now providing them with this major defensive capability in the form of lethal weapons.
Ukraine.
To Ukraine.
Right.
President Trump is learning what all his predecessors have learned, which is that Vladimir Putin cannot be trusted and cannot be worked with, even on the issues where we share common national security interests. And I think that has been a particularly difficult lesson for him, because he started with high hopes of turning the tide in favor of working with Putin. So I think that's going to die a very quick death.
And in about 40 seconds, the Middle East.
And the Middle East at large, I think some major humanitarian concerns for the administration in 2018. We've got Yemen on the brink of one of the worst famines the world has ever seen, potentially, thanks to the Saudi blockade. The Trump administration is trying to really exert the special relationship to try to get them to back down. That will be a huge test for the region generally, I think.
And ISIS?
And ISIS's online caliphate is flourishing. So the big test for the Trump administration is, can we fight them online as well as we have fought them on the battlefield?
Well, it's going to be a fascinating year, and we will all be here to cover it fairly and in a smug-free zone.
Hear, hear.
Thank you,
Well
panel.
said.
See you next.
Của hai xe nó như thế nào, winner có hơn của Exeter hay không? Thì hôm nay mình sẽ làm clip này, mình test khả năng tăng tốc của winner 150 trên quãng đường của thành phố, trong đường thành phố, đường đông. Như các bạn đã biết thì winner 150 trang bị động cơ DOHC 4 thì, hộp số 6 cấp. Còn Exeter 150 thì chỉ có là động cơ 5 cấp thôi, 5 số. Cả hai đều là làm mát bằng dung dịch. Đây chiếc này thì chỉ vừa mới ra thôi. Này bây giờ mình sẽ test cho các bạn thấy. Winner 150 ban đầu cho mình cảm nhận khả năng đề ba rất là ấn tượng. Tại vì đường thành phố đường khá đông nên mà xe này lại vừa mới lấy nữa nên mình không dám kéo hết ga. Clip test tại đại lộ Lê Lợi, thành phố Thanh Hóa. Mình không thích tiếng máy của Winner 150 lắm. Nó không có đặc trưng nhận diện giống như của Exciter. Exciter thì chỉ cần nghe tiếng từ xa đã biết là nó thuộc đời nào rồi. Mình thích ở mỗi cái ở Winner là số của nó vào rất là nhẹ. Quá trình sang số cực nhẹ luôn.